Hi everyone, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed by Equal Life Foundation. And today we will be discussing a very controversial topic that not many people are aware of, which is how money is created, how debt exists as money, or vice versa. And we have as a guest Viktor Persson from Sweden. Hi Viktor.
Hello.
And we will be taking on this topic. As always, you can participate with questions and answers live on the Google Hangout event, as well as directly on the YouTube link. And okay, so let's begin, Viktor, with this point, which is the topic today: is life without debt possible? What is the problem in relation to money and how it is created?
Well, I would say that the primary problem here is that we do believe that we have money in our pockets and money in our banks. Deeper into how money is really created, we will discover a fascinating thing, and that is that most money is actually not money at all. And really, statistics show that only 3% of all the so-called money in the world is really debt. So I mean, to understand what the problem is with money, we must go a little deeper into this concept of money as debt.
So how does this operate in relation to, for example, we were mentioning in our last hangout, money as a right to life. But how come that money exists currently as a problem in itself and not as a given thing that is a provision as part of a, for example, a fundamental human right to get money to live? We said that the laws were not in accordance to it, but now we go further into it, into realizing, well, what is the problem then with the institutions that create the money itself? How is it working at the moment?
Yeah, well, as you might know, money, as normal human beings see it, we see it as a means of communication. I mean, I give you $1 and then I get, some food from you, for example. So it's a way to interact where we exchange services. But in this day and age, money has actually become a means for some people to earn money. So it's not anymore just this innocent tool with which you exchange wares, but it's some people have developed it into their way of making a living in this world. So it's actually what's happened is that corporations has taken over the concept of money and is using it to build enormous wealth. And by corporations here, I mean banks. And I mean, it's fascinating that most of these banks, we believe that they are actually national banks owned by our governments. But in reality, they are actually private banks, and they're owned by people not in the interest of the people, but in their own interest to make a buck, to make a killing. And one example here is, for example, the United States Federal Reserve, which is actually not a governmentally owned bank, but it's a privately owned bank.
Exactly, and that's a very unknown fact, and as it may sound weird that how come we've accepted private institutions to manage how money is created, I mean, it would be unconstitutional, and the reason why this is not known is because we have only believed that a name such as Federal Reserve actually points out to a federal institution, and we know that it is not. And if we look at, for example, in America, is the country with most debt, yet we see it as the country with most power. So how does this relation exist, Viktor, in relation to debt creating wealth?
Well, it works like this. If we go back to the simplest point here of the concept of money as debt, And let's take it from the beginning here. How is money actually created? Well, we have the Federal Reserve, and as I said, this is a privately owned institution. The Federal Reserve has machines within which they make money. So they make these money, and that only comes on which the the money labels are printed. I don't know what, but I mean really little money, So they print them out. Suddenly, these money have actual worth in the economy. When they get out on the market, you can buy stuff with them. You can buy food with them that have substantial worth. But now, so here is the problem with money as debt. That when the Federal Reserve print their money and give them out to the public, they don't do so unconditionally, but they charge an interest rate. And what does this really mean? Well, it means that the people receiving the money must give more money back than what they initially got. And I mean, if you look at it mathematically, that's an equation that is unbalanced. I mean, you can't return something that doesn't exist in circulation. And I mean, this is how then wealth is created, or I mean, because it enforces the majority of people into a form of slavery, because they are constantly indebted, constantly forced to produce more profit, and what happens is that this point of material possession becomes what's called charge. That point is pushed. So that's how you create so-called wealth. But I mean, we can question if it is wealth with debt.
Exactly, and we can see that the banks are the institutions with most wealth in the world, and we know that it's because they have the power to create money, and they lend it, and of course they make that wealth out of the interest, as you were mentioning. So if we look at the consideration of supporting people and making of money something that supports life, in relation to the living income guaranteed, how can you see this is linked? Because right now we have bailouts for banks, but what about bailout for people?
Yeah, it's interesting, this bailout with the banks. What is happening is really that banks, they lend out so much money to points that are really do not in essence have any worth. And then their loans fail and the bank fail. And then they, take, they say it like this, that if we fail, the economy will fail. So government, which is the people, now give us your money. And here an interesting thing happens, because the government, I mean, should really represent the people. And the people should obviously say, hey, why should I give you money to loan me money when I can just print my own money myself and say, okay, let your stupid bank fail there, But what is happening is that, I mean, the banks own the government. So, indirectly owns the people. And so the government say, of course, we will bail you out with, 700 billion of our taxpayer money. And the politicians are happy with it because they're not paid by the people, they're paid by the banks.
The lobbying process, which is very common
Right.
and very popular in order to make our society operate. It's not people asking, for example, the Congress people to direct the society and the government in a certain manner. No, it's actually the money that is talking all the time.
Yeah, right.
So what do you say in relation to this? Because we often see ourselves as incapable of doing any change. And when we look at, for example, the structure that is proposed as a living income guaranteed, how can you see it as the starting point for these kind of changes that must take place in society?
Yeah, well, when we're talking about this topic, we can see that what has so much power and influence in our society is the point that controls money. I mean, money is really a need. You need money to exist, just as you need food to exist. You can't go around bartering. I mean, I have a cow here and I'm gonna buy myself a car or something. I mean, you need money. So that's why it's so important that if we want to make a real and substantial change, we as the people must take direct control over the money supply and stop using money as a way of enslaving people and instead use it to support people, which is, I mean, it's so simple. You simply give the money not with this inherent debt attached to them, but you give them for labor. You know, then it's an equilibrium. The money goes up in the economy, the labor, you know, what's produced as actual worth goes up. And I mean, here in our proposal, the living income guarantee, we actually should suggest to nationalize the banks to make sure that this point that is so important that it can't be owned by anyone else but the people in its entirety.
Exactly, and if we look at the proposal in itself that you're mentioning, the nationalization of banks, other countries that have done this in the past have actually gotten countries to a form of stability. We don't get to know about that. We were also chatting a bit about this, the misinformation that goes on and the manipulation of the media, wherein the powers that be, or the people that have the most control of the media, the news and the articles that we read, we don't get to know more about, for example, what happened in Iceland, or even cases like Libya, wherein the high standard living that they had was because corporations were nationalized, such as the oil industry. And you know, that high quality standard of living can only be provided if the money is given back to the people and not only to a few that in the most of the cases are the owners of corporations or banks. So this is what creates the inequality. And if we look at, you might agree that the changes that must take place to get to that point of owning, of the people owning the way to make money and make it, for example, national banks, will take a process, and it won't be an immediate solution. But what we're doing here is also educating ourselves on how things actually work. And so what would you say it is the point of no return here? Because we're usually not aware of these problems, maybe not even aware of how our money is created. So what would you say is, a recommendation or a suggestion for people in relation to this topic? What can we do as civilians?
I had some lag. Could you say that I missed the last part of your question?
Yes, in essence, what can we as civilians, as the people, as society do in relation to this topic? Because we often see the problem and it's like, oh yeah, banks are owned by a few people and I have nothing to do with it. I can just continue living. But how does this affect or directly affect our lives, and what can we do about it?
Well, we have this awesome thing in most Western countries called democracy. And you know, all of our problems have been created through laws. I mean, if the laws wouldn't have been there, then the banks wouldn't have been there, they wouldn't have been privatized. So, I mean, really, if we want to have a change, it's up to us to, go to the political arena, say, this is what we want, then vote for it. I mean, it's really so simple. And apathy, I mean, it's just a hindrance. Because the solution is clear. It's done through political means. And also what is important is that, as an individual that has an awareness of how money is created, to make an effort to educate others. Because, when you get to see this and you're not one of the super top elites, your decision will be quite obvious, is that you don't actually want this form of indebted system, because you realize that in changing it, life could become so much better for yourself.
Exactly, and this is where we realize that the aspect of responsibility also comes with the provision of rights. So equal rights and equal responsibility. We see that, for example, the provision of, as it is promoted, a basic income is only seen as, yes, let's just give money to people. But what is not realized is how is that money going to be financed? Where does that money come from? What are the changes at a structural level that must take place in order to provide a basic income, a living income within a structure that will in itself provide support for the economy of a particular country, which is what must be understood and considered by everyone that sees that, yes, we're required to give money as a human right, we all agree with that, but what are the structural problems that people face when seeing, well, where will I take this money from? What do you think about this situation wherein people say, let's augment taxes, let's make people pay more taxes so that those taxes, that taxpayers' money, can fund a basic income? And, will it work? What do you see on that?
Well, I would say that the essence of the problem is still here, which is money is debt. I mean, regardless of how much tax you charge, when there is huge amounts of debt in society, all of that tax will go to some lucky person sitting on all the debt contracts, making his money. So tax, I mean, it's really ineffective, and it also creates lots of separation between individuals in society, where they feel that you're taking my money and you're living off me. So, the most effective point here is also, as we suggest in the proposal, to make people actually own companies in their countries, so that they are responsible for their income themselves, and doing that through the process of nationalization.
Exactly, that's a very important and key aspect to understand that a citizen's dividend, it is precisely having our share as part of the economy. It is not just I give you money and that's it, do whatever you want with it. No, because that will obviously create more bubbles and more loopholes that is not looking at the root and cause of the problem. So it is to take the first step, which is, yes, providing what we suggest as a living income, which comes not from taxes of people, but actually from value-added tax, from nationalizing corporations, because the profit made by such corporations can be directly given to people. And this, I suggest people to investigate what happened in Libya, because that's how they got to have a high standard living such as the one that Scandinavian countries had. And the reason also why it was attacked and why that system was essentially dismantled through war. And we were also discussing this off air, Viktor, how we tend to not know about cases of nationalization because of the control of the information. What do you say about this as well?
Yeah, that's really obvious that we can't trust mainstream media in any way whatsoever, because who controls it, and where does the money come from? It's owned by a few corporations, and these obviously use these media assets in order to further their own operations to make money. But I mean, with the internet, there is really great resources out there with people that do not serve any other interest than to get to the truth, so to speak. So, for example, with Libya, one could easily just use Google, and one will find quite cool resources. Like, for example, you can find speeches by Gaddafi, or you can find, statistics, videos. So really now with the internet, it's not that great of a problem. is that just we must be aware that we can't trust mainstream media anymore.
And also, what I wanted to mention is that people, when we talk about nationalization, say, well, that money will go to the government and people are corrupted in the government. Well, that's the whole point. We have to, as a people, create an entire system of what is known as liquid democracy, wherein vote by vote, individual by individual, can set up a system wherein all the accounting of the government itself can be witnessed by the people. And this is a necessary thing to do because it's already happening with all the opening of documents and realizing that, yes, our governments are cheating on the population. We know that. And that's very clear because the system is not working already. So what we require to do is utilize that technology to actually provide transparency and clarity to the people and say, these are the open accounts of this or that bank that we propose are nationalized, so that people directly, and corporations of course, so that people can know directly what amount of money is created as profit, for example, which is what we suggest, that such profit goes to people directly in the form of a living income. And so we are not against corporations, we are pointing out how things currently work and how corporations can work if we implement a system like the living income guaranteed. So what would you say in relation to this usual thing that people bring up in terms of, oh, the government is going to just take all that money and I will remain without any?
Yeah, I would say that it's completely plausible that they do that. But I mean, let's look at why it happens in today's system. It's not because of the people. It's because of how the system is designed. So within that, we can simply design a system. You know, it's simple, so that people can't steal money. You know, it's all about how we design the laws, really. And I mean, we have gone to the moon and stuff, you know. Then we can probably design a system so that government officials can't steal the money coming in from the profits of these nationalized corporations.
Exactly. We can create a system wherein we, the people, decide how money is created, which is a suggestion of nationalizing banks, how corporations earn their money, what amount of money they are earning, so that the profit is not only accumulated or amassed in just a few, but make the people of the nation the shareholders of such corporations, and as such realize that the solution to stop growing up a bubble that will eventually burst is to get to the point of creating money as something that is giving life instead of wealth to a few. So Victor, would you like to say any last words on this? We are about to finish our hangout now.
Yeah, I would like to recommend a documentary called The Four Horsemen that very clearly lies out the problems and particularly explains this money as debt point. And I really suggest that everyone watch it because it's it's very cool.
Yes, also we will place other sources of information to understand, for example, how wars are linked to these bankers' wars and how money is created at that work by Bill Steele, that we support as a source of information. But we realize that in order to, for example, create an entire new way or new monetary system, or making such things as the Federal Reserve something from the government, it has to come through political change. And that's what living income is for. It is a political and economic structure that can be implemented nation by nation as a solution to the problems that, as Victor was explaining, are simply impossible to keep just growing as a bubble that will burst. So thanks a lot, Victor, for your sharing in relation to this topic. We will continue also most likely talking about documentaries and sources of information, because this is part of the reason of these hangouts, to educate ourselves and to then take problem by problem and take the matters at hand in our own hands and take responsibility for it. Thank you and see you next time. Thanks, Viktor.
Thanks. Bye.